Now I'm going to have a look at component detail. Notice when I click on something, it starts flashing with this red-orange color, and this component detail button at the bottom right illuminates. If I click it again, everything goes back to normal, and if I click a wire, the two closest components or connectors and that wire are all going to be flashing. Now, one more thing is I can uncheck and do this manually as well. And if I have things flashing all over the place and I want to make this stop, the reset button next to our zoom will make everything go back to normal. Now I'm going to click this wire and we'll go ahead and look at component detail. And first off, I see a connector here with the terminal that wire enters highlighted. If I scroll down, I see another connector. Again, the terminal that wire enters is highlighted. For each of these connectors, I'll have a name for the component or the connector that it goes into, the code for the connector, the part number for the connector. I want to mention specifically that's not the part number for the component that the connector goes into, and the color of the connector for most connectors available. If I hit this plus sign for wire harness repair, I see what part number repair wire pigtail I would be able to get, and if it's gold plated, this is the part number I'd use. If I wanted to use a repair sleeve or deep in the terminal, I'd also have some information there as well. I'll collapse that menu, and I notice that I have location and system. System is listing every system that this connector is listed in. If I wanted to just show the systems that this wire going into pin 11 of this connector goes into, I'd use select terminal, click the button for show, and that's going to narrow it down to just that wire. And as well, I could choose different wires, more than one, and reset it for all terminals. And one last thing, if I look at component detail for things like ground points, fuses, junction blocks, and relay blocks, all I'm going to get is a little bit of location information and the system circuit. So I don't have any graphics about the pinouts for those items. Now within system circuit, most of my different areas are pretty self-explanatory. Engine, drivetrain, vehicle interior, vehicle exterior. One interesting area, one tree here is power source and network. We're going to talk about that. One big thing on power source network is this is where our charging system diagram is. That's not located in engine, not located exterior anywhere else. It's in power source and network. Hopefully for self-explanatory reasons. So if I'm doing a no charge concern, this is where I'm going to be looking at, the charging circuit. We have the data link connector or DLC3 circuit schematic. This tells us the pinout of our OBD connector located inside the vehicle. We have our network schematics, which is getting more and more important. Right, so this is going to give us all of our network and communications information for different circuits in the vehicle. We have our ground points. So every ground in the vehicle is listed here. Our new wireless charging system is listed here as well. And finally, power source, right? So power source is used to find what feeds power to a certain fuse. A lot of circumstances, you're going to have a fuse that has no power to it. Let's take this wiper fuse, for example, and we'd have to follow back where power actually comes from for this fuse. We may print this out and trace it with highlighters, use our circuit tracing skills. That's under power source. Now I want to look at location and routing. If I open up location and routing, I see the different areas of the vehicle. And each area holds up to 4 different types of menus. Diagrams would be a better way to say that. And the first thing we'll look at is position of parts. Now normally we get to position of parts from a link in component detail or in the EWD. We're not typically looking for a position of a part and know where it is in location and routing to search from. But once we're in position of parts, we see all the components in this area of the instrument panel, again listed in alphabetical order. And if I click on one, main body ECU, it's going to flash for me, and I can use these zoom functions to get in even closer and get a better and better view of where that component is. It is difficult to relate this to what's on the vehicle, but this is one of our critical tasks here. Now if I wanted to reset that view again, I'll hit reset, and I notice it's alphabetical, but down here it resets again to the A's, and it's alphabetical from there on. And I notice also I have this bar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are the different pages of components just in the instrument panel. So we've got 6 different views of different components listed out. Of course, if we went to engine compartment, chose an engine, we'd see the same thing here. We've got different pages showing a different list of components. One thing about the component location is we're only looking at the position of components, of actual parts that are on the vehicle. We're not looking at the position of a connector. So a lot of times in the repair manual, we'll also have something that shows component location. But this can be really good for things like VVT sensors or ignition coils, where we want to be sure exactly which connector goes to which component. Now we'll move from position of parts to wire and wire. That sounds funny, but that's supposed to mean wire and wire harness, maybe a translation issue. This menu is not to show you different connectors, so you still will use this a lot to find a specific connector on a car. Probably actually a very useful task. Unfortunately, we can no longer identify each wire harness individually. We used to have a function to identify it by color. Down here there was a W. Temporarily that seems to have been lost. But again, if I was hunting for a specific connector, trying to locate where that was on the vehicle, very common task, this is probably the best way for me to find that connector on the vehicle. Moving into ground points, again in location and routing, this is different than ground points that we found in power source network under system circuits. Right, this shows the physical location on the vehicle. This isn't a schematic. This is where that ground point bolts to the vehicle or connects in. And finally, we're into relay location. Now, this is a little bit of an advanced feature in location and routing. You'll notice I have a lot of our control units and junction connectors, junction blocks listed on this diagram. Now, if I click instrument panel junction block, you'll notice I've got some special icons that lit up. All right. What this icon is going to do is display an illustration of that junction block. So this should show me an illustration of that instrument panel junction block. And if I click the car, that'll go back to that overall illustration for me. And the second button shows me the inner circuit, the circuitry inside of that junction block. All right, so maybe I'm digging in pretty deep on this one. I need to see exactly what's going on inside of that junction block. That'd be a bit of a special circumstance. If I was to select just a junction connector, Do the same thing. It'd show me the pinouts inside that junction connector. And for internal circuitry, it'd give me a schematic of how that junction connector is wired up. Remember that junction connector is a different type of connector that's connecting a bunch of wires all together. Again, that's the last section for for location and routing. Right? Each of our different areas, position of parts, the wire and wire harness, ground points, and relay location. Now I want to finish up location and routing with how we usually get into location and routing. We're normally not opening up that menu tree to find something specifically. Most of the time we're looking at a schematic. See a connector that I need to investigate further. Maybe I need to find this and measure a voltage at this connector. I'd click on that. I'd go into component detail. And I want to know where in the vehicle this is. When I'm in component detail, I have location, body, wire, and wire. All right, that should sound familiar now. I'll click that. And if we look, our menu tree has moved over to location and routing, the body area, the wire and wire harness diagram, and it's now showing me the connector that I was investigating. And most of the time, that's how we're going to find where something is in the vehicle when we're looking for electrical connectors.